Hi, welcome back to another Gadget Report. Let's talk gadgets. And today I am talking about my favorite gadget, my favorite airline, one of them at least, but not in a very good way. However, end up being a very good outcome. I'm talking about British Airways and a mayday call last month that had a flight that was bound to Singapore from Sydney to turn back and landing safely in Sydney. So let's talk about that mayday call from British Airways BA16. So on September the 8th, so last month, beginning of last month, British Airways flight BA16 that was bound to Singapore made a mayday call roughly half an hour into the flight because fuel fumes were detected in the cockpit. This was what was said on the news at the time, and what an article from the ABC, which I will leave the link below so you can read fully. So it was, this is a flight that happens daily from British Airways. I myself flew in this flight many times, and is in reality a flight from Sydney to London with a stopover in Singapore. So we had just left Sydney, bound to Singapore, and these fumes were detected. The flight carried, apparently, according to the article, carried 200 passengers on board, bound to Singapore, as I said, and half an hour into the flight, the pilot made a mayday call requesting to return to Sydney. According to the ABC article, passengers that were interviewed after the incident said the pilot remained calm and there was no sense of danger inside the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Well, let's say what this is. Well, fumes and in the cabin or in the cockpit, it's always a very, very volatile and dangerous situation, because fire in the cabin, it's the worst possible occurrence in a plane, because of course you are in the air, you have no real way of getting that, if it spirals out of control, it is a serious danger. So when there's something like this, usually cruise pilots usually call a mayday and they land in the nearest airport as a safety measure, which obviously the British Airways crew did, as you would expect from a world-class airline. They call it a mayday and they requested to return back to Sydney. The plane eventually landed back to Sydney safely, as the article says. A video shown in the ABC article shows the Dreamliner landing into Sydney, followed of course by a convoy of emergency services. That's usually the practice. Once you call a mayday, the traffic controllers prepare the airport for your arrival. They divert the flights, not to another airport, but they clear the airspace to give you priority, and that flight lands, and of course the emergency services will be there waiting for the flight, because they don't know if there is any injured people on board. Of course, in this case there wasn't. Or if there is fire on board. They don't know exactly the situation. They just know they had a mayday, and they know what the pilot may have reported to air traffic controllers. In this case, all it was reported, it was fumes in the cockpit, which is a dangerous situation. So that's what happened. In a situation like this, fuel fumes are reported, and a possible fuel leak is occurring. So that was what the pilots thought it could be happening. The risk of fire is very high. So the aircraft was full, and since it had just departed from Sydney, you can expect that the fuel tanks are obviously full. The article does not mention if the pilots dumped any fuel, but sometimes when is a situation like this, the pilots will need to dump some fuel to minimize the risk of fire if there was a rough landing, if there was any problem with the landing gear, if something happens. Of course, if the fuel tanks are completely full, the risk of the whole plane to go up in flames, it's very high. So usually the pilots dump fuel. I cannot obviously verify if this happened on this occasion. It might have happened because is usually the practice. The article does not say it, nor the news on TV, so I cannot obviously say that, but it could possibly have happened. But it is obviously the situation that happens on these occasions. Now, after inspections, the plane landed safely. There was no fire. The passengers were offloaded without any dramas. Everything went smoothly. And after inspections, it was declared a false alarm. So, according to the article, the aircraft landed safely, and after thoroughly inspected by the maintenance teams, it turned out to be a false alarm. According to the article, aviation sources described the incident as a false alarm, saying it was confirmed that there was no fuel leak and it had been a fumes event that turned out to be nothing. So there was some fumes. We don't know where that may have happened or why that might have happened, but after a thorough investigation, it was concluded that there was no leak, there was nothing dangerous about it, there was no fire, there was nothing, and the plane was clear to go. Passengers also said that when the pilot informed them that they were landing back to Sydney, he mentioned he was able to smell some fumes in the cockpit. However, the passenger that reported it to ABC claimed he could not feel that himself. So apparently people in the cabin could not smell these fumes. In fact, he says there was nothing to tell something was wrong. So overall, passengers were very happy that they didn't really feel the danger. Although if these fumes had been a fuel leak, it would be a serious danger. But they could not feel that, and they all claimed that the British Airways crew was very, very calm and informed them throughout the process. They knew what was going on. They knew they were going to return to Sydney because of these fumes, and apparently everything was done and run smoothly. The passengers were rebooked on other flights, and the Dreamliner was given the all clear. So you know that usually then, because of pilot hours, etc., it might have not been possible for the flight to go straight away. But and it was also mentioned in the article that it was easier to rebook the passengers in other flights rather than to put them all together and go, because of all these arrangements, and airlines have different arrangements. So this is a possibly dangerous situation that end up with a very good outcome. This is to show that sometimes when we hear mayday or mayday calls, that it's going to be a catastrophic event, that something really bad is happening. Not necessarily. In this case, the crew called a mayday because if those fumes were in fact a fuel leak or anything like that, in the cabin or elsewhere, but in the cabin, it could turn to be a very high risk of fire. And that is the worst possible scenario you can encounter in an aircraft. So, of course, the right course of action, something like this, call it a mayday, do an emergency landing and deal with the situation on the ground with all your passengers and crew out of the aircraft. So, British Airways, the crew, did the right thing and called that mayday. Of course, we all hear about those very, very bad situations when pilots call a mayday and there's crashes or there's a very serious incident, things like that, but not always that is the case. Sometimes you have a mayday that a pilot needs to call a mayday and needs to do an emergency landing somewhere, and it turns out to be something like this. There was fumes, could possibly be a very, very dangerous situation, and it turned out to be a false alarm. So this was what happened to British Airways on the 8th of September, so last month, and it turned out to be okay, and everyone was safely back on the ground. The plane was clear, everything was fine, and the Dreamliner was good to go the next day. And that's all for today. I hope you liked this event today. Was about a mayday call that ended up not being that much of a trouble. It was good outcome. The plane landed safely. Everyone was offloaded. Everyone returned to their destinations, and even the aircraft was clear to go. But sometimes, of course, we know doesn't happen that way. And this is to show that good practice within aviation, and in this case, you know, British Airways, once again, showing quality, showing good practice, showing ethic, calling that mayday and doing the right thing. Now, were you on that flight? If so, let us know what was your experience. We saw a couple of passengers claiming that everything was very calm, nobody could tell that something was wrong, although the pilots were claiming there was fumes in the cockpit. Apparently, these fumes were not present in the cabin, so passengers were very calm and they were okay. But were you in that flight? If you were, please leave us a comment. How was your experience? How did everything unfold on that flight? And of course, if you have any suggestion of any other topic that you would like me to discuss, have you ever been into a mayday call of a flight that ended up landing into another airport, an emergency landing because there was some issue? If you ever been in a situation like that, please let us know. How was the experience? How did you handle it? How did the crew handle it? Which airline were you with? And where was it? Because quite frankly, these type of events happen very, very often. I mean, not every day, I would say, but they happen. And most of the times we don't even hear about it because they are like this. They just a precaution. The crews call it a mayday because they are aware of the risks. They run checklists and they know what they should and they shouldn't do. And for good practice, they call a mayday, they land the aircraft, and then they deal with the situation on the ground. So most of the times we don't even hear about it. We heard on this particular occasion, it happened in Australia. It was a flight that returned to Sydney. So obviously the news knew about it and it was reported. But chances are there will be other instances like this that won't get, or at least we won't know. In Australia, maybe in the countries that it happens, it may be reported or not. And sometimes it's just a precautionary measure to land the aircraft and deal with things on the ground, because of course on the ground they can offload the passengers, get the aircraft empty, and get it looked by technicians and see if everything is fine. In the air, it's not possible. So it was a good outcome, obviously, and this always come to show how safe it is to fly these days. These things can happen, and you still can safely land, and pilots are highly trained to deal with these situations, and to obviously bring the plane to the ground, land the plane safely, and get the passengers safely on the ground and with no further issues. Of course, where there's fumes, there's always a very, very, very serious concern, because fire on an aircraft is panic, is bad, as you know. But if things are dealt with properly, things can end up like in this case. It was false alarm, but it could have been some fire, it could have been some electrical component, it could be something that would cause that problem. And of course, it needed to be checked, it needed to be, done, and get the green light for the aircraft to fly again. Of course, that bird was okay, and he was ready to fly the next day. So this was one of the good outcomes for Sydney Airport. Now, if you have, as I said, any other topics that you would like me to talk about, please suggest. If you have been on a mayday, as I said, please let me know what happened, which flight was this, and how did it unfold, what was the cause, was it fumes as well, was a fuel leak, a decompression, what was it, what happened? And of course, any other topic that you would like me to talk about, please leave in the comments below, and I'll be very happy to do that. And as you know, put a like on the video and subscribe the channel with a little click on the bell, so you get a notification of a new gadget report every week. The channel has been growing, I'm very, very happy for that. But if you put a like, if you subscribe the channel, you will signal the YouTube algorithm that more people are watching my videos, that more people are looking at what I do, and of course they will distribute my content for more people, and the channel will reach a much bigger audience. So please, if you like what I do, put a like and subscribe the channel with a click on the bell, so you don't miss it every week. Before I go, I would like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one. Bye!